Hey everybody, before you get started on your Jamestown and Powhatan investigation and learning, I wanted to give you just some background on the story of Jamestown. So please watch this video I've made for you and then answer a couple questions in the Google Classroom and turn them in, and then you get going on the web investigation that I have for you. So, as you know, Jamestown was England's first permanent settlement, coming some 20 years after Roanoke and the disappearance of the Roanoke settlers. Some essential questions down here for you to look at is, why do people move? What happens when different cultures clash? And how does, as we looked at with Roanoke, how does geography influence the way people live? Where the people chose to develop their settlement in Jamestown along the James River turned out to be a very interesting location, and we're going to talk about that this week. So first off, who came and how did they get there when talking about Jamestown? Well, the London Company of Virginia, also known as the Virginia Company, developed the opportunity for settlers to come to Jamestown, and this is what they called a joint stock company, which basically meant that investors who wanted to make money could invest and come over to the Jamestown area. They wanted to make money. It was definitely the idea of mercantilism for England, in that they could harvest great cash crops in the area, such as tobacco or cut timber. They could look for gold and make goods that they could then sell back to England. The idea solely to make profit. So when did they come? Well, King James, hence Jamestown, granted this charter to establish the colony in Virginia. So therefore, the first colony of England was, of course, Virginia. And the London Company thought naming the colony after the king would help them get the permission that they needed. And this happened quite a bit. They would try to impress the king or impress the monarch, and so they would name things after the monarch, such as Jamestown or the James River. And the colonists arrived in Virginia and established Jamestown in 1607. And the colony definitely struggled, as you can see on this note down at the bottom here in red, but it did survive, and therefore it would be considered England's first permanent settlement. So why? Well, as a joint stock company, the London Company would start a colony in Virginia to make money. Investors definitely wanted to get rich. Many of the people who came over from Jamestown were not well off. In fact, a lot of indentured servants came, as did a lot of people who had a very meager living in London or in England. So they were looking to better their lives. Interesting note, the Jamestown colonists were also supposed to look for the lost Roanoke settlers, but they either never did or they really weren't that interested. They were more interested in stoking their future. So location. What a terrible location for a colony. Most geographers would agree. The location was 40 miles up the James River from the Atlantic Ocean in the colony of Virginia, also the state of Virginia today. The climate was very hot and extremely humid. Very swampy land with stagnant, dirty, and brackish water. It was an excellent military location, so they did have that going for them, and they did fortify using palisades so enemies could not sneak up on them. But they constantly ran out of drinking water, which, as we know from Roanoke, was also an issue due to drought. And sometimes they had issues with local Native Americans, like the Powhatan Confederation, and so it ended up being not the best geographic choice. By the way, key term here at the bottom, brackish for brackish water, basically means when fresh river water and salty seawater mix, and it causes the water to have too much salt in it, and they can't drink it. So, neighbors, who was around them? The Powhatan Confederation was around them, which is basically a union of about 30 Algonquin-speaking Native American tribes. and all those tribes united under Chief Powhatan. In fact, he was so powerful that they named the confederation the Powhatan Confederation after him. Hence, Powhatan, and why the confederation is named the same as the chief, as many of you guys found out from our Colonial All-Stars assignment. And by the way, confederation just refers to a group of individual groups that come together under a single leader or single government. In this case, under a single leader. So what challenges did they encounter? Those being the settlers of Jamestown. Well, the location was, like we said, great for military reasons, but it was so swampy. They had many bugs that carry diseases, malaria type diseases, things like that. Jamestown was built on that swampy island, like we said, so stagnant, smelly, filled with sewage, filth, and disease. Oftentimes kind of a not very good or secure living for them as far as disease would go, and not good drinking water. Also, the soil ended up being not good for planting crops. In fact, the Jamestown settlers, upon arrival, wondered why the Native Americans had never chosen that location, because they figured it was such a good military location. They would soon find out why, because of the lack of good growing conditions. So what else did what other challenges did they face, the colonists that is? Many colonists died, and they kept having to send new ones from England. So who in their right minds would go to Jamestown knowing the risks and the fact that they could lose their lives? Oftentimes it was criminals, the very poor and unskilled workers, and indentured servants. So without the right kind of skilled workers, who was going to do the blacksmithing, the carpentry, and so forth? And by the way, when John Smith arrived, who would end up being the leader of Jamestown, he was a prisoner. He was accused of mutiny in England. So when the leaders discovered the London Company wanted him to be one of the colony's leaders, he was forced to be released and became that leader. So his past was a checkered one at best. What challenges did the Native Americans encounter with the arrival of the Jamestown settlers? Well, the Powhatan were generally friendly and helpful most of the time, but they did not trust the English, and the relationship between the two sides was always on edge. Powhatan did help the colonists in times of famine, which means when they're in lack of food, and bring food to the colonists. But oftentimes the English colonists would move into land where they weren't supposed to, and that would lead to raids by the Powhatan, and they were oftentimes at conflict. If you look at the interesting note here at the bottom, there's a very popular story that Chief Powhatan captured John Smith and was going to have him killed, but Pocahontas stepped in to save him. Many historians, if not most, believe this story was a great exaggeration, and that John Smith, many years later, told that story, and that it likely never occurred at all, as we see lots of times with folksy historic tales. Other challenges they encountered in Jamestown: great famine. In fact, in the winter of 1609-1610, they have the Great Starving Time, as it was called in Jamestown. And this is a staggering number, really. During this time, the Jamestown colony experienced severe famine and food shortages. Some of the food from the natives did stave off the hunger, but overall, the population in Jamestown dropped from 400 colonists to 60. That's how many people lost their lives due to famine. Colonists were forced to eat livestock, pets, anything that they could. Interestingly, the colonists were about to give up. They were moving towards the coast and were going to head home, and this would be the end of Jamestown. And it would be a failed colony, much like some of the early Roanoke expeditions. However, as they were heading that direction, they saw English ships on the horizon, with 150 new colonists, and the colony was saved. So, as we close out this early discussion before you get into your history investigations, weighing out your perspectives on Jamestown, let's talk about some of the important people who made this first settlement happen. King James, of course, granted the London Company the charter, and it could never happen without that. And he was the King of England from 1603 to 1625, so it's a 22-year period. So Jamestown, the James River, and Fort James are all named after him. And there he is. You have John Smith, who was selected to be the leader of the Jamestown colony. Many people believe because of his strict discipline, and that because of that discipline he might stoke good relationships with the Powhatan and other native groups. He was good at drawing maps, and he did that. And he did draw many good maps of Jamestown and the Chesapeake Bay region. By the way, interesting note, if you've seen the Disney movie Pocahontas, they have it all wrong. They say Smith did not marry Pocahontas, although he does in the film. She was a little child when he arrived at Jamestown, and he was far older. Chief Powhatan is an important player and all-star in this tale. He was a very powerful leader of the Powhatan Confederation. Much of what the Powhatan did in their activities was based upon what he and his closest advisors said would be the way that it would go down. Very powerful leader. Increased the size of the Powhatan Confederation during his time from 5 tribes to 30 tribes. And he is Pocahontas' father, by the way. The Powhatan was so powerful under his watch that the Confederation of Tribes was named after him, as we talked about earlier. Pocahontas is an important all-star in this tale. She is the daughter of Powhatan, like we just said, also known as Mateoka, and later Rebecca, which she took on an English name as she married John Rolfe, and she helped the English many times with food and supplies. She does end up dying in England, actually, after she caught illness while visiting her husband and young son in England. And she was captured in 1613 by the English colonists during one of the wars with the Powhatan, but she chose to remain with the English, and that's where she fell in love with John Rolfe. As we oftentimes saw, Indian confederations and English settlers coming together time and time again. And there's a more English version of Rebecca, or Pocahontas. And the aforementioned John Rolfe came to Jamestown in 1610. So a couple years after the establishment of Jamestown, he brought smuggled Spanish tobacco seeds with him. And the tobacco he planted grew so well, it was so desired in England, it became a very important cash crop for the colony. Some say that cash crop really helped Jamestown thrive. His tobacco, which was now grown by many in Jamestown, saved the colony. And as we mentioned, he married Pocahontas. Not only did his tobacco, by the way, as you look at this note at the bottom, make money for the London Company, it has also been growing in the area for more than 400 years. That means to this day. And helped shape the political and social structure of America. Both good and bad ever since. So there's some important people. There's some background on the Jamestown colony and settlement. So hugely important to the history of what is now the southern, or what became the southern colonies, and is now the southern region, or southeast region, of the United States. So go ahead and answer your follow-up questions here, and then on to your Jamestown and Powhatan investigation. Thank you so much.